If we exclude people who are intersex, why could it be a problem to be defined as a man or as a woman?
Well, it may or may not be a problem depending on what you mean by man or woman. So if you mean something very confined or restrictive in terms of what kind of behavior a person might express, what kind of sexuality they're expected to have, then if you mean it very narrowly, you're going to create categories that not all men or not all women comfortably fit into. So that becomes then a problem for many people who exist along a spectrum of variability with regard to gender expression as opposed to their chromosomes, and to sexuality, sexual expression.
So the problem is more about how humans put rules to define the masculine and the feminine.
Yes, so, but notice that you've switched modes of speaking by doing that, because usually when we talk about a man or a woman, someone imagines you mean a very specific kind of body with specific chromosomes and specific genitals. And there's an elision to what many people call gender, where one is talking about expression. And when we're talking about gender, then we use the phrases masculine and feminine. So the problem is that masculinity does not map nicely on top of male. So the gender and the basic biology do not necessarily match.
What happens today when an intersex child is born in the US and in Europe?
Well, I really don't know what happens in Europe.
Okay.
And so in the United States, when an intersex child is born, I'm going to say it depends on where they were born within the United States. The United States has a very heterogeneous healthcare system, and in some parts of the country, intersexuality and the treatment of intersexuality has changed so that there's a greater emphasis on not doing immediate surgery to, quote, correct the genitalia, and a greater emphasis on allowing a period of development and allowing counseling. But in other parts of the country, these ideas are still too new to have been adopted. And in those parts of the countries, there still is a push to do some kind of surgery right away. So this continues to change, but we don't have a national mandate for how to treat intersex. We have that goes with a national healthcare system. We have a very heterogeneous healthcare system. And so it's a problem if you want to change standards of practice nationally. It's also a problem because some medical specialties have established new standards of care, particularly pediatricians, pediatric endocrinologists argue against immediate surgery, whereas surgeons want to do surgery. So they have not established, the surgical societies have not established new standards of care. So it may depend on who dominates the treatment team when a child is born.
Today, does medical science agree about prenatal sexual development, or are there still points of discord?
I think there are points of discord, but basic anatomical events following fertilization and how they lead to sexual development of a male body and a female body, I think are pretty well agreed upon. I think what's less agreed upon is, and the role of hormones in directing the anatomical development is, I think there's a great deal of agreement on that. There's still things to be learned about it. There are things we don't know and that are worthy of continued medical research. But I think that the area where there is still controversy is brain development. So the development of the nervous system, because it's a very common idea that hormones in fetal development affect brain development. But there's a great deal of disagreement about how much they affect it, and certainly no understanding at all about how they affect it. And in fact, there's a huge dispute about brain development. So the basic anatomy of the genitalia and how that happens, I think there's pretty good agreement about.
If a 3-year-old child chooses gender, is it possible that his choice changed by the fact that the brain evolves up to the age of 25?
Well, it's not clear to me that hormones are the main thing involved in deciding. I think that gender identity, that is a sense of self as boy or girl, for most people is established at quite a young age. But I say for most people because I think that for some people it occurs over a longer period of time. So for most children, gender identity, a sense of self as boy or girl, becomes clear by about 3 years of age. And then there are aspects of gender expression which may continue to develop. But there may be some individuals for whom there are much later ideas develop about gender identity.
Would you say that it's more rare that people at the age of 50 would change their orientation?
Yeah, it's rare. It happens, but it's less common. So, and I think in terms of sort of stability of processes, so that what are the things that make gender identity a stable set of events in one person may differ in another person, but on the whole, I mean, the most common thing is for gender identity to become pretty stabilized at a surprisingly young age. In terms of sense of self as boy or girl or a man or woman, gender expression varies a great deal more over the life cycle.
You say that nurture takes an important role in the gender attribution. So what are the cultural changes today that motivates the desire of a change?
Well, I think there's been the general political feminist movement for equality goes well beyond just equality in the workplace. So it's one thing for women to say we want to get paid as much as men in terms of salary, but then that actually has profound implications, because if women are going to get paid as much as men, but then they go and have babies, right? And so then you have to begin to think about how culturally you accommodate childbirth if you have a culture which expects to reproduce itself. And then that opens up the possibility that, well, maybe not only women take care of babies, but maybe men do. That involves pushing to change traditional older notions of masculinity. You have the political movements for LBGT, and you have same-sex couples wanting to be parents. That changes the notion of gender, because if you have two women raising a child, then you don't have a father and a mother, you have two mothers, or two men, you have two fathers. But their roles may be very different, their gender expressions may be very different. And there may be one father who stays home with the baby more, and the other father who goes to work and earns the money for the family. So the minute you make what seems like a simple demand, pay men and women the same, and that began in the the most recent version of that began in the 1970s in the United States with the feminist movement, but that had such profound implications for all the rest of culture, and then for what gets defined as masculine and what gets defined as feminine.